Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're exploring Nassim Taleb's Fooled by Randomness.
Yeah, it's a fascinating look at how randomness shapes our lives, especially when it comes to the markets.
For sure. Now, Taleb, for those who don't know, he's had quite the career, right? Derivatives trader, hedge fund manager, and now a professor.
He's definitely seen it all. And this book is kind of his way of sharing what he's learned about the role of chance and luck.
Okay, so the book kicks off with this story, Solon's Warning. It's about King Croesus.
Oh, yeah, Croesus. He was super wealthy and thought that made him the happiest guy around.
But then he meets Solon, who's like, hold your horses, fortune can change like that.
And well, wouldn't you know it, Croesus ends up losing it all to the Persians.
It's like a cautionary tale, right? Don't assume the good times will last forever.
Exactly. And Taleb uses the story to introduce the idea that we often confuse luck for skill, especially when things are going well.
Makes sense. We think we're in control, but then, bam, randomness strikes.
Right. And that brings us to Nero Tulip. He's this fictional trader in the book who's all about minimizing risk.
So not your typical Wall Street hotch.
Not at all. Nero is very cautious, risk-averse, not chasing huge returns.
Okay, I'm seeing a contrast coming here.
You got it. Enter John, another trader, but complete opposite. High-yield bonds, living the high life, betting big.
Classic high roller.
Yeah.
So what happens when things inevitably go south?
Well, Taleb sets up this scenario called the Red Hot Summer. It's 1998, the Russian financial crisis hits.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, and Nero, with his conservative approach, he actually does all right.
Well, John.
Not so much, he gets hammered. And this really highlights Taleb's point. It wasn't necessarily that Nero was a better trader.
It was more that he was prepared for things to go wrong. He understood the role of randomness.
Exactly. Our brains want to see patterns, find explanations, even when things are basically random.
We like to feel like we're in control.
Right. And this leads into the next section, Monkeys on Typewriters, all about survivorship bias.
Oh yeah, that one's a classic. A million monkeys typing away, and one, by pure chance, writes Shakespeare.
Precisely. But we only focus on that one successful monkey and ignore all the others who type gibberish.
It's like we only see the winners, not the countless others who tried and didn't make it.
And that can mess with our perception of success, make us feel like we're not measuring up.
Like comparing your portfolio to Warren Buffett's without considering all the investors who didn't become billionaires.
Exactly. Or looking at a successful entrepreneur and thinking, if they can do it, so can I, without acknowledging the role of luck and timing.
Right. It's like Taleb saying, hey, don't forget there's a lot of randomness at play here.
Exactly. And that brings us to Mark and Janet, this picture-perfect couple living on Park Avenue.
They seem to have it all, right? Wealth, status, the whole 9 yards.
But then you look closer, and Mark, he's actually pretty unhappy.
What's going on?
He's constantly comparing himself to his even more successful neighbors, never feeling good enough.
It's that survivorship bias in action.
Exactly, focusing on what's missing instead of appreciating what he does have.
So how do we avoid that trap? How do we stop comparing ourselves to the outliers?
Well, first, we have to be aware of this bias. Remember, we're always seeing stories of success, and those stories often leave out the luck factor.
So take those success stories with a grain of salt.
Absolutely. And especially be wary of anyone who claims to have some surefire formula, especially in areas where chance plays a big role.
There's always an element of randomness, right? And then there's double survivorship bias, where even when we try to factor in failures, we might still be missing part of the picture.
Right, like in The Millionaire Next Door, it focuses on those who got rich through frugality and saving, but what about those who did the same and didn't become millionaires?
We're only seeing the survivors who fit that particular narrative.
Exactly.
Wow, this is giving you a whole new perspective on how we view success and failure.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to uncover in Fooled by Randomness.
I can't wait to dive deeper. But for now, let's take a quick pause. We'll be back in a moment to continue our exploration of Fooled by Randomness. Okay, so we're back and ready to keep going with Fooled by Randomness. I think we were about to get into wax in my ears, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's all about how we can learn to, well, kind of live with randomness, not fight it so much.
That feels super relevant these days, with all the uncertainty in the world.
Totally. And one of Taleb's big points is we have to accept that we can't control everything.
Easier said than done, I think.
For sure. But he gives some interesting advice, like he talks about the Odyssean mute command.
Okay, that sounds intense. What is that?
So it's from the story of Odysseus. He had his crew tie him to the mast of his ship so he wouldn't be tempted by those sirens.
Oh, right. Their singing was supposed to be irresistible.
Yeah, he knew he wouldn't be able to resist, so he took action beforehand. And Taleb's saying, we need to do something similar with our emotions, especially when it comes to things like investing.
So have a plan and stick to it, even when you're feeling panicky or greedy.
Exactly. Set clear rules. Don't make impulsive decisions based on, like, fear or FOMO.
It's like you need a prenup for your emotions.
Uh-huh. I like that. And there's this other idea he brings up, gambler's ticks.
Oh yeah, those little rituals people do, like blowing on dice or wearing lucky socks.
Right. But Taleb uses it to describe, like, our tendency to see patterns where there really aren't any.
Like when you flip a coin and get heads a bunch of times in a row, you start thinking it's rigged or something.
Exactly.
Mm.
Our brains just love to find patterns, even in random data. And that can lead to some bad choices.
He talks about the Skinner pigeon experiment too, right? That one always stuck with me.
Oh, yeah. The pigeons would get food randomly, regardless of what they did. But they started doing all these weird things, thinking it was making the food appear.
Like they thought their little dance was causing it.
Yep. Trying to find order in a completely random situation. And it's like Taleb saying, hey, humans do this all the time too. We look for explanations and causes even when things are just, well, random.
It's comforting to think we have some control, even if it's not real.
I think so. And then there's the story of Carneades, this Greek philosopher who went to Rome.
What did he do?
He gave two speeches, one arguing for justice and then another arguing against it.
Wait, really? Why?
He was showing that even the most convincing arguments can be contradicted. Like relying only on logic can be risky, especially with complex stuff like the market.
So be open to different perspectives and don't get too attached to your own beliefs.
Right. You got to stay a little skeptical. And then we come to a mathematical meditation on history. This is where he brings up Monte Carlo simulation.
Ooh, okay. I've heard of that, but like, can you explain how it works?
It's a bit complicated, but the basic idea is to create thousands of alternative histories, like in a computer program.
What could have happened?
Exactly. And this helps us see that history isn't just this straight line of cause and effect. It's way more random and unpredictable than we think.
It makes you wonder how much of what we think was inevitable was just luck,
Right. And then we have nobody is perfect. Here, Taleb actually shares a story of how he got fooled by randomness.
Oh, what happened?
Well, he got this medical diagnosis that was really scary. But even though he knew the chances of it being accurate were super low, he still got super anxious about it.
So even an expert in probability, he can be thrown off by his emotions, especially when it's personal.
Yeah, nobody's immune to that. And then we get to loser takes all. Taleb introduces this idea of nonlinearity, using the example of a sand pile.
Oh, right. Like you keep adding grains of sand, nothing much happens, and then suddenly one tiny grain causes this huge avalanche.
Exactly. And it's a metaphor for all sorts of things in life. Like little things can have big consequences that we just don't see coming. Financial markets, social movements.
It makes you realize how interconnected everything is, right?
Definitely. And finally, we get to randomness and our brain. This is where Taleb dives into why it's so hard for us to understand probability naturally.
This is just not how our brains are wired.
Pretty much. Like, we evolved in a world where seeing patterns, even if they weren't really there, helped us survive.
So that same instinct that kept us safe from predators back in the day, now it's working against us.
In a way, yeah. He talks about things like the birthday paradox. The odds of two people in a group sharing a birthday are way higher than you'd think.
Oh, yeah, right.
And it shows how our intuition can be totally wrong when it comes to probability.
It's like our brains are playing tricks on us, making us see order where there isn't any.
That's a good way to put it, which is why we have to really work at being more rational and analytical, especially when randomness is involved.
So, big picture, what's the takeaway here? How do we live in a world that's so full of randomness? Like, how do we actually use all this?
That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah, that is the question. How do we deal with all this randomness? What are we supposed to do with this information?
Well, first you got to acknowledge it, right? Accept that randomness is a thing and it affects us more than we realize.
Okay, so awareness. Got it. But what then?
I think it's about being humble intellectually, admitting that we don't know everything, we can be wrong, and sometimes things just happen out of our control.
So being okay with not always having the answers and not being able to control every outcome.
Right, and being skeptical too, not just of other people's ideas, but our own. Our beliefs, assumptions, all of it.
Like questioning those stories we tell ourselves about why people succeed or fail. It might not be all skill or all luck,
Exactly. It's probably a mix of both. And on a more practical level, it's about making choices that can handle some bumps in the road.
So don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Yep. Diversify, have backup plans, don't overextend yourself. Those are all ways to kind of soften the blow if something random happens.
It's like finding that balance between taking calculated risks and being ready for anything.
Exactly. And realizing that sometimes, even with the best plans, things just won't work out how you thought.
Right. And how do we deal with that? How do we not just get discouraged and give up?
That's where resilience comes in. Being able to bounce back from those setbacks, mentally, emotionally.
It's interesting, though, because it seems like our whole culture is about avoiding failure at all costs.
Right. But Taleb's saying failure's going to happen, it's part of life, and you can actually learn from it.
It's like, see it as a learning experience instead of some personal defeat.
Exactly. Even the most successful people have failed a bunch of times. It's all part of the process.
This has been a really thought-provoking deep dive. I'm definitely thinking differently about the role of randomness in my own life and how to, like, make decisions with more humility.
I'm glad to hear that. And if you want to keep exploring this stuff, Taleb's book, Fooled by Randomness, it's definitely worth a read. It'll make you think.
I agree. Everyone should check it out. And hey, if you enjoy this deep dive, tell your friends and family about it. We want to help as many people as possible understand this whole randomness thing.
Yeah, spread the word. And as always, happy learning, everyone.